So hello everybody. In this video lecture we will cover peripheral nervous system. So let's go ahead and begin. Okay, so what are the parts of the peripheral nervous system? So it's actually all neural structure outside the brain and spinal cord. Right, so brain and spinal cord, they are central nervous system. Everything else is part of peripheral nervous system. So it will include receptors, peripheral nerves, and associated ganglia, and motor endings. Both nerves, spinal nerves and cranial nerves, right, they both are part of peripheral nervous system. What is ganglia? So if you read a PowerPoint, lab PowerPoint, it's actually explained what ganglia is. But just to very quickly to remind you, with neurons, they have a body of neuron, right? So let's say if this is a neuron, right? So those are dendrites, and this is axon. Right, here's another neuron cell body with all the nucleus, right? So those are dendrites and axon. So this collection of axons in the peripheral nervous system, this is nerve, right? So that's a nerve. So nerves are axons. And this collection of cell bodies and dendrites in the peripheral nervous system are called ganglia. So that's what ganglia is. So ganglia, this is where you would find body or soma of the neurons and dendrites. And axons or nerve fibers, we call axons also nerve fibers, they make nerves, peripheral nerves. Right, so nerves, ganglia, sensory receptors that we will talk about in this chapter, and motor endings, those are motor endings of the axons, those are part of peripheral nervous system. Now, peripheral nervous system can be divided into sensory division and motor division. And another name for sensory is afferent, and another name for motor is efferent. So sensory information actually moving from the periphery, right, towards the central nervous system. So the only information that is received by your central nervous system is sensory information. So everything that your central nervous system receives called sensory information, and it's received by afferent division. All right, so and then your central nervous system gonna integrate, make sense of this information, and it can send through also peripheral nervous system through the motor division some commands, right? So you can respond to sensory information, and that's the job of motor division. Motor division is divided into somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system, you control this motor function, and this will be your skeletal muscles that are innervated by somatic neurons. And autonomic nervous system, you cannot control this motor function. So autonomic neurons will innervate your smooth muscles and cardiac muscles. Now, autonomic nervous system divided into somatic division, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic, we call it fight or flight response, and parasympathetic is called rest and digest. So when you under stress or you, intensively exercising, right, then your sympathetic division takes care of your smooth muscle and cardiac muscles. When you're resting and digesting, then parasympathetic fibers control your smooth muscle and cardiac muscle, right? So that's kind of a division of peripheral nervous system very quickly. So let's look at sensory receptors. Because we want to talk about sensory receptors, because we go back over here, peripheral nervous system includes sensory receptors, right? So what are those sensory receptors? How we can classify them? So sensory receptors are specialized to respond to changes in their environment, so stimuli. So any change in the internal or external environment is called stimulus. So when the receptors are activated, they create potential. Remember, potential is separation of charges, right, and movement of charged particles. So we can just call it like electrical signal, right? So when receptors are activated, this activation results in graded potential, but to make it simple, in electrical signal, right, that trigger nerve impulses. But that electrical signal that is created inside receptors, it's not action potential, it's graded potential. Now, sensation is awareness of stimulus, and perception is interpretation of the meaning of the stimulus, and this occurs in the brain. Now, we can classify receptors, we can use different types of classification, but here's the most common. We can classify them on a stimulus type, on a location, and structural complexity. So if we're looking at stimulus type, we can divide the receptors into mechanoreceptors. So they respond to touch, pressure, vibration, stretch, itch. Thermoreceptors, they're sensitive to changes in temperature. Photoreceptors respond to light energy, and they're located in a specific area of your body, in the retina of an eye. Chemoreceptors respond to chemicals like smell, taste, change in blood chemistry. Nociceptors, those are sensitive to pain-causing stimuli, like extreme heat. So you do have thermoreceptors, but thermoreceptors just gonna tell you, is it cold or warm or even hot? But when it's really, when this temperature change is extreme, then you feel pain, right? You feel pain when you put your fingers in a hot water, or when you put it in a cold water, when you start feeling pain because of this extreme temperature. Those are special type of receptors, nociceptors. They also respond to excessive pressure, because excessive pressure causes pain, and inflammatory chemicals. So that's classification by stimulus type. What stimulates these receptors? Is it some physical touch and pressure, right? Is it temperature, light, or chemicals, or can be both, right? Like temperature and pressure and chemicals, not both, all of them, but at extreme degree, then we have nociceptors. Right, so here we have nociceptor, thermoreceptors, chemoreceptors, mechanoreceptors. So mechanoreceptors sensitive to stimuli that distort the plasma membrane. Now we can classify them by location. Either they are exteroceptors, so respond to stimuli arising outside the body, right? So that will be located in the skin for touch, pressure, pain, temperature, and most special sense organs, right? Like your eye, your ear, your tongue, right? That will be exteroceptors because they send something outside of your body. And interoceptors, or another name, visceroceptors, and they respond to stimuli arising in internal viscera and blood vessels, and viscera are internal organs. And they can be sensitive to chemical changes, tissue stretch, temperature change, but those changes come from inside the body. That's why they interoceptors. And a special type by location are proprioceptors. Proprioceptors allow you to understand where you are in a space, right? You know where your parts of your body are, you know where gravity is, kind of, right? So that's proprioceptors. They respond to stretch in skeletal muscles, tendons, joints, ligaments, and connective tissue covering bones and muscles. And they inform the brain of one's movement. So it's inform your brain about the movement and the position of your body parts, right? So for example, if you move your toes right now, you're not looking on your toes, but you know they are moving, right? So that's proprioceptors that send a signal to your brain about movement of your toes, right? Or even, let's say if you close your eyes and somebody start moving your arm up and down, even you're not doing it and you cannot see it, but you feel where your arm is, right? So that's a job of proprioceptors. So again, exteroceptors, interoceptors, proprioceptors, when we classify them by location. So here's the proprioceptors. We have two major proprioceptors, Golgi tendon organ, and tendon kind of for tension, and they're located in the tendons, and they respond to tension, and muscle spindle. Spindle starts with S, so it's for stretch and speed of stretch. And they are located inside your muscles. So you know when your muscles are stretched. And we also can classify receptors by structural complexity. Either they are complex or simple, right? So complex, those are receptors for special senses like vision, hearing, equilibrium, smell, taste, right? We have rods, cones, we have different hair cells. So that's complex receptors. When it's simple receptors, then it's for general sensation. And this would be either encapsulated, so either there is a capsule or unencapsulated dendritic endings. So simple receptors are dendrites. Now, are those just free dendrites, right? Like over here? Or then if they are free, we call them unencapsulated, so no capsule or free. I like free, that's a long word for me, right? So it's a free nerve endings or free dendrite or encapsulated dendritic endings. And they for general sensation, and if you remember from Bio 58, general sensation include touch, pressure, stretch, vibration, temperature, pain, muscle sense, right? And special senses, it's your vision, hearing, equilibrium, something that you have a special organs for special sensation. So special senses, we have complex receptors. For general sensation, we have simple receptors, either free or encapsulated, right? So now if we have free dendritic endings, right? Encapsulated are free, those will be thermoreceptors for temperature, cold receptors and heat receptors. And they are located in the dermis, either in superficial dermis or in a deep dermis. Another free receptors are nociceptors. So those are for pain. Respond to pinching, chemicals from damaged tissue, everything that causes you pain. Temperature outside the range of thermoreceptors, or some chemicals like capsaicins found in chili peppers, something that cause pain as well, right? So free nerve endings, so free dendrites for temperature and pain. Right, for temperature, thermoreceptors, or for pain, nociceptors. Now, if we, and we have another one for light touch, like a Merkel disc or tactile cells, and hair follicle receptor, just for very light touch. So those are free endings, right? And you can see over here, you can see that's a free endings here. That's our tactile or Merkel disc for light touch, hair follicle receptors, right? And they can be like, look, they can be exteroceptors, they can be thermoreceptors, chemoreceptors, because we have so many classification, right? We can use more than one characteristic when we want to describe the receptor. Now, when we're talking about encapsulated, then all of them will be mechanoreceptors, right? So for touch, pressure, deep pressure, muscle stretch, stretching tendons, stretching articular capsule, right? Meissner corpuscle, Pacinial corpuscle, they have a special capsule, Raffini endings, muscle spindle, Golgi tendons organ, joint kinetic receptors, right? So those are encapsulated, they all mechanoreceptors. And mechanoreceptors, I just wanna kind of go back over here and remind you that they sensitive to stimulus that distort the plasma membrane, right? So when plasma membrane is disturbed, then it will be mechanoreceptors. So they all will be encapsulated. And this is how they would look like, right? So we would have dendrites, right? But they would have some, there would be some capsules surrounding them. So here, again, some classification of the receptors. We can either simple, so both on the top are simple. Why? Because we have dendrites, right? So here we have dendrites that are free, and this we have dendrites covered by the capsule, but those still simple receptors. And this is complex or specialized receptors. This is rod for vision. Now, from sensation to perception. So our survival depends upon sensation and perception. So again, sensation is awareness of changes in external or internal or external environment. Perception is a conscious interpretation of those stimuli. Right, so this is how we kind of go. We go from chemistry over here, for example, right, to sensation and to perception. It just kind of like example how you process smell, right? So you have your chemoreceptors in the nose, right? They also exteroreceptors, and they are special senses. So that's complex. Receptors. So from chemistry, you go to sensation, and then you go to perception. So you are aware, and you pretty much understand what you smell. Now, sensory integration. We have levels of neural integration in sensory systems. So we have receptor level, the sensor receptor. Then we have circuit level. That's a pathway, ascending pathway towards your brain. And perceptual level, neuronal circuits in the cerebral cortex. So perception happens in the cerebral cortex, right? But before we understand the sensation, we need to stimulate the receptors, and we need to deliver this electrical signal to the brain through this circuit level. Now, receptors have specificity for stimulus energy. Stimulus must be applied in a receptive field, and transduction must occur. So stimulus energy is converted into a graded potential called a receptor potential. So just to make it clear, let's look at the diagram first. So here we have two receptors, right? So on the top, this is free dendrite. So that's a dendrite, right? So that's a dendrite, and we will go to the peripheral process and cell body, then central process, so on. So that's a dendrite. So over here, if we apply stimulus, right? So you see we're applying stimulus. In this situation, this stimulus opens sodium channels, gated sodium channels. So it can be, let's say, some pressure, for example, right? Pressure is applied, some touch. This disturbs the membrane and sodium channel opens. So sodium moves in, and when charged particles are moving in, that's electrical impulse. This is called graded potential. But this graded potential gonna generate action potential. So this graded potential is also the same as generator potential. Right, graded potential will generate action potential. So graded potential equals generated potential. Now on the bottom picture, you can see the special receptor. It's not dendrite, that's a special cell, special receptor. We apply stimulus. In this situation, we have like sodium moving in, right? We have calcium moving in. Calcium is needed for neurotransmitter to be released. So neurotransmitters cannot be released without calcium. So stimulus is applied, sodium moves in, right? That generate receptor potential because that's a receptor. Neurotransmitter is released and here's our dendrite. Now in this part of the dendrite, because of neurotransmitter attaches to channel, ion channel, and sodium start moving in. So this is our generator potential because it's gonna generate action potential. And action potential, this is what gonna reach your brain, right? That's what goes to your brain. Graded potential, receptor potential, generated potential, they local electrical impulses. And either they generate action potential or they don't, right? So let's now go back and read about it. So in general sense receptors, we have dendrites. Our receptors are dendrites, either free or surrounding by capsule. Then receptor potential and generator potential are the same thing, right? So stimulus is applied, receptor generated potential in afferent neuron, and then action potential in axon at the first node of Ranvier, because action potential generated in axons only. Right? Now, when we have the special sense organs like your smell, taste, vision, then stimulus stimulate receptor potential in a receptor cell. Now this receptor cell release neurotransmitter, and this neurotransmitter generate generator potential in the first order sensory neuron, and then action potential if threshold is reached, right? So that's what we said. So here, kind of like more complicated process here. We go from the receptor potential, release of neurotransmitters, then generator potential, and then action potential. When here we just have stimulus, we have graded potential that is the same as generator potential, and we generate action potential. Okay. Now, sometimes when we continue stimulation of their receptor will adapt. So they will decrease their response. That's called adaptation. All right, so many receptors adapt very quickly. Let's say olfactory receptors. You see how their adaptation time very fast. Touch and pressure receptors, they adapt very quickly. Proprioceptors, not that, don't adapt to a continuous stimulus. Pain receptors never adapt. What it means? It means that, well, if you enter a room where that smells really bad, it stinks, right? It's like really, really bad smell. If you stay inside that room for 10, 15 minutes, right, for some time, you will not feel this smell anymore, because those receptors will adapt to this continuous stimulus. Or touch receptors. You know how you put glasses on your nose sometimes, right? Or you can even put glasses on top of your head, and that's pressure, right? They have some pressure touch. You feel them first, your glasses on your head, and then you stop feeling them because receptors adapt. Now pain, that's again our survival needs. Pain receptors cannot adapt, because if we stop feeling pain, we will not take care of it, right? So pain receptors don't adapt. Now, those receptors that adapt very fast are called phasic receptors. And an example, pressure, touch, smell, and those that adapt slowly or not at all are called tonic receptors. And nociceptors, proprioceptors, that's our tonic receptors. Right? Okay, so why did we talk about? Because I'm going back and I'm reminding you that I even can go, right, maybe over here. Yeah, hold on. Yes. So how we receive, how we integrate sensory information, first will be on a receptor level, right? We integrate on a receptor level. And this is why we discussed all different receptors, right? Now, we will talk about how this information actually gonna reach your central nervous system. So here's processing at the perceptual level. So when, so when receptors generate, when receptors are stimulated, they generate receptor potential, right? Then this receptor potential, it can be generator potential, or receptors will create generator potential in the first order neurons, and generator potential generate action potential. Now, action potential, that's the electrical impulse that will go up, right, through afferent neurons to your brain. Now, how do you identify the sensation? Depends on a specific location in the sensory cortex. Last time we talked about somatosensory cortex, and we talk about primary visual cortex and different parts of the cerebral cortex. Now, for general sensation is post-central gyrus, right? This is where this cortex is located. So it depends what kind of sensation is that, how you can process it. It will be it will be sent to a specific part of your cerebral cortex. And perception will include perceptual detection, so ability to detect a stimulus, magnitude estimation, and this will be coded in the frequency of impulses, and spatial discrimination, specifically from what part of your body this sensation comes from, right? So you will be able to detect it, you will be able to see how intense it is, and what part of body this sensation is coming from, right? Now, perception of pain. Pain warns of actual or impairing tissue damage. So when you have tissue damage, is it because of temperature or pressure or some chemicals, right? The tissue damage result in pain, and pain inform you something wrong with your tissue. So what can stimulate pain? Extreme pressure, extreme temperature, histamine. Histamine is inflammatory chemical, potassium, ATP, acid, bradykinins. So those are also inflammatory chemicals. Impulses travel on fibers that release neurotransmitter glutamate and substance P. So now this chemical will stimulate your neurons, right? The neurons, they synapse with other neurons, but those that carry pain information will release glutamate and substance P. Some pain impulses can be blocked by inhibitory endogenous opioids. So you do have some chemicals in your body that can temporarily block or inhibit pain. Right, so that was pain. Now, reflexes. Reflexes can be divided into intrinsic, right, or inborn, and acquired or learned. So something you're born with, or you learn it, you know, when you grow. So reflex is a rapid, involuntary, predictable motor response to a stimulus. So that's a definition for both reflexes, learned and inborn. So it's a rapid, so very quick, involuntary, so you don't need to think about it. It's a predictable, so we know what's gonna happen, response to a stimulus. So either are inborn or learned, they result from practice and repetition. Like example, driving your skills. Or learned reflexes can be also when you learn how to go to the restroom, right? When you little baby, you wear diapers, and then you learn, you know, how to use toilet, right? That's your learned reflexes. When we're talking about reflex, we need to describe a reflex arc. And it's a neural path from receptors to your effectors organs, right? So a reflex arc include receptor, so site of stimulus action, sensory neuron that transmit afferent impulses to the central nervous system, integration center, and it will be either one neuron, then it will be monosynaptic, or many neurons will be polysynaptic region of the central nervous system. That will be your integration center. It can be brain, it can be spinal cord. Motor neuron, this will conduct efferent impulses from the integration center to effector organ. And effector organ, you only have actually two effector organs, muscles and glands. And of course, we have three types of muscles, skeletal, cardiac, smooth. They all can be effectors, but those are muscles. And another effector organs are glands. That's it, no other effectors. And they will respond to the stimulus by either contracting or secreting, right? So those are components of a reflex arc. And it's a neural pathway because we also have endocrine pathway for reflexes, but we're not covering it in this, lecture. So here we have stimulus, right? And this stimulus need to create a graded potential in a receptor. In this example, it's a free receptor, so that's just dendrite, right? Also, this is extrareceptor because stimulus comes from outside. And it's this nociceptor, right? Because it's probably cause pain, right? So you see how you can classify a receptor using different classification. So we have receptor, then we have this sensory neuron. All sensory neurons are unipolar. So this is cell body, right? And this is short process, and then it's divided into two parts, peripheral process and central process. So it's a unipolar sensory neuron. It's a sensory neuron. Then we have integration center. In this situation, integration center is spinal cord, but integration center, it's always central nervous system, either spinal cord, right, or brain, if you're talking about neural reflexes, right, not endocrine, because otherwise it can be some endocrine gland. All right, but this is our interneuron, and here's motor neuron, and effector organ in this situation is skeletal muscle, right? So that's a reflex that includes all these parts: receptor, sensory neuron, or afferent, start with A, afferent pathway, integration center, efferent, motor neuron, and effector. And the last part of this chapter, we will talk about spinal reflexes. So we will cover several spinal reflexes here. So spinal somatic reflexes, why we call it spinal? Because integration center is in spinal cord. Why we call it somatic? Because effector organs are skeletal muscles, right? Testing of somatic reflexes is important clinically to assess the condition of the nervous system. So So we will cover like here two reflexes, stretch reflex and Golgi tendon reflex. So for skeletal muscle activity to be smoothly coordinated, proprioceptor input is necessary. So proprioceptor means you need to receive information where the parts of your body are and that they are moving or not, right? That's a proprioceptor input. So muscle spindles inform the nervous system of the length of the muscles, right? Spindles like a stretch, so and speed of stretch, and Golgi tendon reflect about tension. Your brain about the tension in the muscles and tendons. Right. Now here we can see this muscle spindle. So muscle spindle are special muscle cells. They you know, like small in the diameter, and they can contract, but they don't produce the contraction of the whole muscle, right? So that's, they kind of like mostly to inform your brain about the you know, that your muscle is stretched or not, right? And also initiate the contraction of your muscle. So that's a muscle spindle. And here's a Golgi tendon organ that inform your brain about tension in your muscles. Again, when your muscles are stretched, right? So when your muscles are stretched, you know it, your brain knows it, and you understand it actually. And when you have tension in your muscles because they are stretched, your brain are informed about it as well. So first reflex we'll talk about is stretch reflex. And stretch reflexes to maintain muscle tone in a large postural muscles. And the whole point of this reflex is when your muscles are stretched, right, then reflex is to contract. So muscle is stretched and muscles are contract in response of this stretch, right? It's like negative feedback, right? It's not really negative feedback, but it's kind of like this. You stretch your muscles and they contract. So here's a patella or knee jerk reflex is an example of a stretch reflex. So if you tapping the patella ligament, right, you excite those muscle spindles in quadriceps. So when you excite them, those muscle spindles here, right, they think that, you know, your quadriceps are stretched, right? So here's the muscle spindle. So you're tapping over here. So when you're tapping it, kind of like a muscle spindle are activated, and muscle spindle send information right through this efferent neuron to your spinal cord that these quadriceps muscles are stretched, right? So now what would be your response? If it's a stretch reflex, then you contract them. So right, you see, so you move your leg up, so you make this muscle shorter, you contract it, right? So tapping the patella ligament excites muscle spindles in the quadriceps. Efferent impulse, blue, travel to the spinal cord where it synapses with motor neuron, shown here in red, right? And this motor neuron send activating impulse to quadriceps, causing it to contract, extending the knee, right? So muscles stretch, muscles contract. That allow you to keep your posture, it allow you to walk, right? People, if this reflex doesn't work, people cannot walk. Now, another things also happen because if your quadriceps contract, you wanna relax your hamstrings because they are antagonists. You don't wanna contract them both. So the same efferent neuron gonna synapse with another motor neuron, right? But this motor neuron shown here in dark blue, it will inhibit hamstrings. So they do not contract, so they relax, right? So that's a stretch reflex. Integration center is the spinal cord, right? It's actually kind of like monosynaptic because there is only one synapse between blue and red, right? Of course, we have here this polysynaptic, but it just kind of to inhibit hamstring. So it's a somatic reflex, right? It's a spinal reflex. It's a monosynaptic reflex. And when your muscles are stretched, your muscles contract. And of course, they contract before this information reaches your brain, right? So this is unconscious contraction. So it's very quick, it's predictable, right? A response to a stimulus. Now, how Golgi tendon reflex is different? In many ways. First, it's polysynaptic because this is monosynaptic. You see how this blue synapses with red, only one synapse. This one is polysynaptic, so it really takes longer because monosynaptic, very quick reflex. And this one, when your muscles are stretched, you relax them instead of contracting. So here muscles are stretched, you contract them. Here muscles are stretched and you relax them. And this prevents your muscles from damage during excessive stretch. So if it's stretched too much, then you just relax it. So Golgi tendon reflex produce relaxation or lengthening in a response to tension. So let's look at the picture over here. So we're looking at quadriceps here as well, right? So when we excite not muscle spindles, but Golgi tendon organ, and there is a way to do it. I tried with students, that's really way harder than patellar reflex. So when you excite the Golgi tendon organ, they send information to the spinal cord that this quadriceps is stretched again, but instead of contracting it, you relaxing it, right? So you see how it synapses with interneuron, and then it synapses with motor neuron, so it's a polysynaptic. But this red motor neuron, it's actually minus, so it inhibits the contraction. So muscles relax. At the same time, antagonistic muscles, hamstring, they contract, right? So quadriceps strongly, so when you activate it, right, Golgi tendon organs are activated. Now, what here? Efferent fibers synapse with interneurons in the spinal cord. Efferent impulses to antagonistic. Oh, okay, so quadriceps gonna relax and antagonistic muscles gonna contract, right? So that's Golgi tendon reflexes that produce relaxation, respond to the tension. And tension is what? When muscles are stretched, right? So look, here would be example. Let me see. You guys see me. So for example, if I hold my, arms like this, right? And let's say my 2-year-old baby, get on a table, right? And it's actually, well, maybe somewhere higher, somewhere. So my baby is right there, somewhere very high, and baby is falling, right? So I catch my baby, right? This muscle, what? It's stretched, right? Because the baby weighs something. But I worry too much about baby, so I contract these muscles to hold him, right? So again, so if baby falls on my arms, right? What happened with this muscle, right? This muscle is actually it stretches a lot, but I contract as a response. This will be stretch reflex, right? But if I just holding my arms like this and some heavy rock falls on my arms, and I know I have too much tension, it's very hard for me to hold it. I don't even know it because it's a reflex, then I'm gonna drop it, right? So that's a Golgi tendon reflex. So it depends. If something falls on your arms and if you contract it, then this would be your stretch reflex, right? Stretch reflex. If you drop it, then it will be your Golgi tendon reflex. Golgi tendon produce relaxation, and stretch produce contraction. Now here's one more. That's really complicated reflex. It's called Flexor. right? And Crossed-Extensor reflex, or the easy name is withhold reflex. Withhold reflex. This was when it's initiated by a painful stimulus and causes autonomic withdrawal from the threatened body part. Right, so let's look how it works. So here the stimulus is, somebody holding you, right? But let's imagine not somebody holding you, but you have like some painful stimulus, like maybe like high temperature, or, somebody cutting your arm. If somebody cutting your arm, right, you're gonna flex it, right? So first somebody apply very painful stimulus, noxious stimulus, painful stimulus, right? So this stimulus moves to your spinal cord, right? And it synapses with the muscle and you contract. So you withdraw it. You just move your, in this situation, you move your arm away, right? So biceps need to be contracted, then triceps need to be relaxed, right? So we stimulate biceps, we inhibit triceps. But why it's called cross-extensor, right? So this is flexes, but the other arm will extend, and it's all it will happen without you even knowing it, right? That's why it's a reflex. It's a very quick response. So that means that so let's read over here. So stimulated side, right, is withdrawn, so it's flexed, stimulated side, and contralateral opposite side is extended. So one is flexed, one is extended. That's this type of reflex. So it's polysynaptic and pretty complicated, but works pretty good. Also, we have superficial reflexes, and they generated by cutaneous stimulation, and they depend on upper motor pathway and cord level reflex arc. So these reflexes are used to check how your upper motor pathway work, right? Those are in your spinal cord. Superficial reflex, plantar reflex. So here we apply stimulus on the sole of the foot, and normal response would be downward flexion of the toes. Like you see, like this guy, that's a normal plantar reflex. And this is test for corticospinal tract. Cortica means it's originated in a cerebral cortex, and it moves through your spinal cord, right? And it's control your skeletal muscles, right? So that's a normal reflex. Now, if you stimulate the same way, right, the sole, and instead of, look, this flexion, downward flexion, we have dorsiflexion. So we kind of fanning of the toes. This is not normal. This is called Babinski sign. And in adults, it indicates this corticospinal or motor cortex damage. So it's not the inner reflex arc. This is in your spinal cord or in the brain, some damage in the spinal cord or in the brain. However, it is normal in infants because of incomplete myelination, right? So that's why infants cannot really walk yet, because even those reflexes are not, so their corticospinal tract, motor cortex are not completely developed yet. But if adult has this Babinski sign, they wouldn't be able to walk normally as well, right? So that's a superficial reflex. And the last reflex is abdominal reflex, and it causes contraction of abdominal muscles and movement of the umbilicus in response to stroking of the skin, right? So you kind of stimulate the skin, and then your muscles contract, and they vary in intensity from one person and another. And it's also checking for corticospinal tract lesion, right? So if there is some lesion, it means damage present, then it will be absent. This reflex will be absent. Okay, so that was the last slide in this chapter. I hope it was helpful, and thank you for watching.